5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. My name's Evan. I'm 32 now, but back then I was 27, young, ambitious, and stupidly in love. The kind of love that makes you believe the world is fair, that loyalty means something, and that people you trust could never twist the knife in your back. I had a steady job, a decent apartment, and a fiancée named Lauren who I genuinely thought was my soulmate. We'd been together since college, survived long distance, bad jobs, even a brief breakup that I thought made us stronger. And then there was Tyler, my best friend since we were kids. The kind of friend who knew every embarrassing story, every insecurity, every dream I'd ever confessed after a few too many beers. The kind of friend who stood next to me as my best man when I first proposed. I used to think of him as the brother I never had. Looking back, I should have known better. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens after. About how people like Tyler and Lauren can tear your life apart and still have the audacity to smile in your face years later like they've won something. And how, sometimes, patience is the sharpest form of revenge. Before everything fell apart, life felt peaceful. I'd just gotten promoted at work, my mom was healthy, and Lauren and I had started planning the wedding. She wanted something small, just family and a few close friends. Tyler was, of course, my first choice for best man. He joked that he'd make sure I didn't faint at the altar, and I laughed, thinking that was the biggest problem we'd face. My mom adored Lauren. She'd always say, "That girl grounds you, Evan. You get lost in your head too much, but she brings you back down." Mom had this quiet warmth about her. She was the kind of person who believed the best in everyone. Maybe that's where I got it from. Tyler was around all the time. He'd stop by for dinner, help us with furniture, tag along on double dates with his latest fling. He'd never been the settling type, always bouncing from one relationship to another, charming his way through life like rules didn't apply to him. Still, he was fun, charismatic. People liked him. Even Lauren seemed to light up when he was around, laughing at his stupid jokes that weren't even that funny. I noticed, sure, but I didn't think much of it. She laughed like that with everyone. Then there were small things that, in hindsight, feel like red flags I just didn't want to see. A text from Tyler late at night. "Tell Lauren I'll grab the thing tomorrow." Except I never told her about the thing. Or the time Lauren came home from errands, wearing a hoodie that looked awfully familiar, one I'd seen hanging in Tyler's truck. When I asked, she brushed it off with a smile. "Oh, he let me borrow it when it got cold. Don't be jealous." I laughed, told her I wasn't jealous. Maybe I should have been. My mom was the first to sense something was off. She pulled me aside one evening after dinner and said quietly, "You trust Tyler too much." I remember chuckling and saying, "He's my best friend, Mom. I've known him longer than I've known myself." She just gave me that look, the kind mothers give when they know something you don't. "Be careful, honey. Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you." I didn't understand what she meant then. The downfall started slow, like a crack in a windshield that spreads until everything shatters. It was about a month before the wedding. Lauren became distant, said she was stressed, tired, needed space. I tried to be understanding. I planned date nights, surprised her with flowers, offered to postpone the wedding if it would help. But she just seemed gone, detached. Tyler, meanwhile, was more involved than ever. He'd text me daily about wedding plans, ask about the venue, the food, even joke about how crazy brides get before the big day. Then came the night everything changed. I'd left work early, wanting to surprise Lauren with dinner. She'd said she was staying home, not feeling great. On the drive back, I remember feeling weirdly nervous, that kind of gut feeling that something's wrong, but you can't quite place it. When I pulled into our driveway, there was another car parked out front. Tyler's truck. I remember my first thought being that maybe he stopped by to check on her. That's what friends do, right? But when I opened the door and heard the laughter, soft, familiar, intimate, I knew. I don't even remember walking down the hallway, just the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears. When I opened the bedroom door, there they were. Lauren froze first. Tyler looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. The silence that followed was deafening. Then he had the nerve to say, "Evan, man, it's not what it looks like." I think I laughed. Actually laughed. Because what else could I do? I remember saying something like, "Oh, thank God." For a second I thought my best friend was in bed with my fiancée. He tried to speak again, but I couldn't hear it. I just walked out. That night, I drove for hours. I don't know where I went. I just needed to be away, from the apartment, from them, from the version of myself that thought loyalty mattered. I ended up at my mom's place around midnight, knocking on her door like a kid who'd had a nightmare. She opened it, took one look at me, and pulled me into a hug. I didn't have to say anything. She already knew. The days after were a blur. Lauren tried to call. I blocked her. Tyler texted me, said he didn't mean for it to happen. Like that made it better. My mom wanted to march over there and teach that boy a lesson, but I told her it wasn't worth it. Truthfully, I didn't have the strength to care. I just wanted it all gone. The memories, the plans, the future I thought I had. So I left. Sold the apartment, switched jobs, moved 2 towns over. Started from scratch. It wasn't glamorous. I spent the first year in a cheap 1-bedroom, working long hours and avoiding people. But slowly, life rebuilt itself. I met new friends. Found hobbies. Eventually, I met someone new, Claire. She was quiet where Lauren had been loud. Steady where Lauren had been unpredictable. She didn't rush me to heal. She just stayed. And over time, I began to feel whole again. Then last week, my mom passed away. It wasn't sudden. She'd been battling heart problems for years, but it still hit me like a truck. She was the one person who'd never betrayed me, the only person who stood by me through everything. Losing her felt like losing the last piece of home I had left. Her funeral was yesterday. Small, intimate, just like she would have wanted. I kept my distance from most people from my old life, but apparently, not everyone got the memo. Because as I stood by her casket, shaking hands, trying to keep it together, I heard a familiar voice behind me. That smug, drawling tone I hadn't heard in 5 years. Evan, long time no see, man. I turned around, and there he was. Tyler. Same confident grin, same fake charm. And on his arm, dressed in black, was Lauren, my ex-fiancée. For a second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. But no. She looked right at me, eyes darting nervously, and he just smirked. Then he leaned in, close enough that only I could hear, and said with a grin, "Guess I won after all." That was the moment everything inside me went still. Because after 5 years of silence, 5 years of rebuilding, of holding back every ounce of bitterness, I finally realized something. He thought he'd won. He really believed it. I smiled back, calm as ever, looked him dead in the eyes, and asked, "You still renting that 1-bedroom apartment?" He blinked, caught off guard. And that's when Claire, my wife, walked through the door. The look on his face was priceless. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. Because what happened after the funeral made it clear, Tyler wasn't done with me yet. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away quietly. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't believe what happened next. When I saw Tyler's face twist from smug satisfaction to stunned disbelief as Claire walked in, holding our daughter's hand, no less, a small part of me thought that would be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, seeing that I'd moved on, that I'd built a life without them, would finally make him back off. But that was wishful thinking. Because people like Tyler, they don't stop when they lose. They try to rewrite the story. After the funeral service, I did my best to stay composed. Claire held my hand, whispering little reassurances like, "You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to," while I greeted people I hadn't seen in years. Old neighbors, a few family friends, even my aunt from out of state. It was surreal, grief mixed with awkward small talk, memories of my mom flooding back between every handshake. But the worst part wasn't the loss. It was the weight of Tyler's presence behind me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd catch him staring every so often, that same fake smile plastered on his face. Lauren avoided my eyes, clutching his arm like it was a lifeline. She looked older, tired. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the weight of choices she couldn't undo. For a brief, stupid moment, I felt pity. Then I remembered walking into my old bedroom that night, and the pity evaporated. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for food and coffee. I stayed near the entrance, talking to a few of Mom's old co-workers, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Didn't think you'd show your face," Tyler said, his tone casual but laced with that same arrogance he'd always had. "I came to bury my mother," I replied, not even turning fully toward him. "Not to revisit the past." He chuckled. "Still dramatic, huh? Relax, man. It's been years." I finally faced him. "Exactly. So maybe you should keep it that way." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt, but amusement. "You've changed," he said. Used to be you'd do anything to keep the peace. Guess marrying up gave you a backbone. I didn't rise to it. Claire walked over just then, holding 2 cups of coffee. She smiled politely, extending one to me, then turned to him. You must be Tyler, she said evenly. He grinned, like the attention fed him. And you must be the new Mrs. whatever your name is now. Evan, she corrected sharply. Mrs. Evan Cole. There was a brief silence. Then he looked her up and down in that smug, appraising way that made my blood boil. He's really upgraded, he said with a smirk. Congrats. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Funny, she said calmly. He said the same thing this morning. Tyler blinked, clearly not expecting that. She handed me my coffee and walked away like nothing had happened. That was the thing about Claire. She never needed to raise her voice to make her point. I thought that exchange would be the last of it. But as the afternoon went on, Tyler found excuses to hover nearby, making comments to people we both knew, always loud enough for me to hear. Yeah, Evan and I go way back. I was basically his brother. Helped him through everything, even his engagement, he'd say with a smirk. Or, funny how life works out, huh? Some people just can't handle competition. Every word was designed to get under my skin. And it worked. The thing about grief is, it strips you raw. You're vulnerable, fragile, just trying to stay upright. And he knew that. I could feel him watching for cracks. It was my cousin Ben who finally pulled me aside. You okay, man? That guy's been running his mouth all afternoon. I'm fine, I lied. Ben frowned. You sure? 'Cause if you want me to escort him out, I will. I almost said yes. But Mom's voice echoed in my head. Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you. Tyler wanted a reaction. He wanted me to break, to remind everyone that I was still the guy whose best friend ran off with his fiancée. I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. But the universe, as usual, had other plans. When the event ended and people started leaving, I noticed Lauren walking toward me. Slowly, hesitant. She looked nervous, glancing around like she wasn't sure if approaching me was a good idea. Claire had gone to the car with our daughter, so it was just me standing by the door. Evan, she said softly, can we talk? I didn't answer at first, just stared. She looked smaller than I remembered. Paler. About what? I finally said. She swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. You think 5 years later, this is the time and place for that? Her eyes glistened. I know it doesn't change what I did. Lauren, I cut in. You don't have to explain. You made your choice. She nodded slowly. I did. And it was a mistake. That caught me off guard. You're still with him. Her gaze flicked toward Tyler, who was chatting animatedly across the room. Yeah, she said quietly. Sometimes mistakes drag on. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. She'd destroyed my life, and now she regretted it. But instead, I just felt empty. Then she looked up at me again and said something that made my stomach twist. He hasn't changed, Evan. Not really. He talks about you all the time. It's like he's obsessed. Obsessed? I repeated. She nodded. He still compares himself to you. Every little thing. Where you live, what you drive, your job. It drives him crazy that you moved on. I didn't get to respond, because just then, Tyler noticed us. His expression darkened instantly, and he walked over, jaw tight. What's going on here? He demanded, slipping an arm around her shoulder. Nothing, I said. We were just talking. About what? About how you still can't stand not being the center of attention. He gritted his teeth, forcing a smile. Careful, man. Wouldn't want to make a scene. You already did, I said quietly, brushing past him. As I walked out, I could feel his glare burning into my back. That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. Tyler wasn't just showing up to gloat. He was baiting me. He wanted a rematch, a new chance to prove he was better, and he wasn't going to stop until he tried. Over the next week, weird things started happening. Small things at first. An email from an unknown address filled with old photos of me and Lauren. A Facebook friend request from a fake account using a picture of my wife. Then a message on LinkedIn, of all places, saying, guess you're not the only one who can move on. No name. But I knew. Then one morning, Claire came into the kitchen holding her phone. Do you know a Tyler Grant? She asked, her expression unreadable. My stomach sank. Yeah. What? He messaged me. I froze. What? She handed me the phone. The message was short, but every word dripped with malice. Hey Claire. Just thought you should know your husband isn't as honest as you think. Maybe we should talk sometime. From one friend to another. I felt my pulse spike. When did he send this? Last night, she said. I didn't respond. But, Evan, what's going on? I took a deep breath. It's him. He's trying to mess with us. Claire frowned. Why? After all this time? Because he can't stand the idea that I'm happy, I said quietly. He needs to win. She reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Then we make sure he doesn't. For a while, we tried to ignore it. Blocked his accounts, tightened privacy settings, even told a few friends to keep an eye out for fake profiles. But Tyler was persistent. He started calling from unknown numbers, leaving voicemails with fake pleasantries. Hey buddy, just checking in. Hope the new job's treating you well. Sometimes, I'd hear Lauren's voice faintly in the background, telling him to stop. The last straw came 2 weeks later. I was leaving work late when I spotted his truck parked across the street from my office. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe someone else had the same model. But when I got in my car, I saw him sitting there, grinning, phone in hand. He rolled down the window. You look busy these days, man. Miss the old times. Go home, Tyler, I said flatly. He leaned back in his seat. Funny, I was going to say the same thing to your wife. I stepped closer. If you ever contact her again, I'll make sure you regret it. He laughed. Relax. I'm just catching up. It's not my fault you're still sensitive. Sensitive? I repeated. You ruined my life once. I won't let you do it again. He smirked. Ruined? You should thank me. If it weren't for me, you'd still be stuck with her. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to walk away. Giving him what he wanted, a reaction, would only make things worse. But later that night, as I lay awake next to Claire, I realized something important. Tyler wasn't just trying to annoy me. He was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before I snapped. And the longer I stayed silent, the more confident he'd get. That was when I decided I wasn't going to play defense anymore. Because Tyler had spent 5 years believing he'd broken me. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I'd spent those same 5 years learning how to rebuild myself. How to plan. How to wait. And if he wanted a war, I was finally ready to give him one. The next few weeks felt like a test of how much I could endure before something broke. Tyler wasn't just a ghost from the past anymore. He was a presence again, a shadow that somehow managed to slip back into my life without permission. After the funeral, I thought he'd fade out, that his bruised ego would make him retreat. But instead, it was like the encounter had reignited something in him, a need to prove, once again, that he could take what was mine. It started small. He began showing up at places I frequented, the coffee shop near my office, the same gym I'd been going to for years, even the local park where Claire and I took our daughter on weekends. Every time, it was coincidental. He'd flash that same grin, make small talk, and pretend it was normal. Hey man, didn't know you came here too, he'd say, as if we hadn't spent years avoiding each other. The first time, I just ignored it. The second time, I gave him a tight smile and walked away. The third time, I started realizing this wasn't chance, it was choreography. He was watching me. Claire noticed the tension too. She didn't say it outright at first, but one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner, she asked, You ever feel like someone's following you? I froze. What do you mean? I ran into that guy again. Tyler, at the store this morning, she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling just slightly as she dried a glass. He said hi. Asked how you were holding up after your mom's funeral. I clenched my jaw. He talked to you? Yeah. I didn't want to make a scene, but, Evan, it felt off. Like he was fishing for something. That was Tyler's specialty, acting harmless while planting little hooks into people's lives. I told her I'd handle it, but the truth was, I didn't know how yet. Then, one night, the hook caught. It was a Thursday. Claire had gone to bed early, and I was working late in the office downstairs, going through some files. Around midnight, I got a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of my daughter's school. The caption read, Cute kid. Looks like her mom. I shot up so fast I nearly knocked over my chair. I didn't even think. I called the number immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I texted back, Who is this? Even though I already knew. No reply. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I dropped my daughter off myself, checking every car in the lot. I didn't see him, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. Claire noticed how tense I was, And when I told her what happened, she went pale. That's it, she said. We're going to the police. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I knew how this would look. A grown man accusing his ex-best friend of stalking him, based on a text from an unknown number. Tyler was careful, always just subtle enough to stay out of legal reach. So I decided to confront him myself. I waited until Saturday, when I knew he'd be at his usual bar, the same one we used to go to back in the day. I showed up alone. When I walked in, he was there, sitting at the counter, drink in hand, chatting up the bartender like he owned the place. Evan, he said when he saw me, all fake cheer. Man, what are the odds? I walked right up to him. You need to stop. He blinked, feigning confusion. Stop what? Following my wife. Messaging her. Taking pictures of my kid's school. His smile faltered for a second, just a second, before returning. That's a serious accusation, man. Don't play dumb. You're not as subtle as you think. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You really think the world revolves around you, huh? Not everything I do is about you, Evan. I stared at him, my voice low but sharp. You've been obsessed with me since we were kids. You couldn't stand it when I got something you didn't have. A job, a fiancé, a future. So you took it. He smirked. And look how that turned out. Maybe I did you a favor. Don't test me. I said, my hands trembling now, not from fear but from restraint. He chuckled, sipping his drink. You always had that temper. It's what made you so easy to beat. You think you've moved on, but you haven't. You're still that same insecure kid who looked up to me. That last part hit harder than I expected. Because for years, I had looked up to him. I admired him, trusted him. And in one night, he'd taken that trust and turned it into a weapon. I turned to leave, but he called out, Hey, before you go, tell your wife she's got good taste. Guess she likes my type. I didn't hit him. Not then. But it took everything in me not to. For the next few days, I stayed on edge. Checking the locks, keeping my phone close, glancing out the window every time headlights passed. But things seemed to quiet down. No more messages. No sightings. Claire started to relax again. I almost believed maybe confronting him had worked. Then the betrayal came. Not from Tyler this time, but from somewhere I didn't expect. It was a week later. I came home from work, exhausted, and found Claire sitting at the dining table, pale and silent, her laptop open in front of her. Evan, she said quietly, we need to talk. Those words always send a chill down your spine, no matter how long you've been married. What's wrong? I asked, setting down my bag. She turned the screen toward me. It was an email from Tyler. My name in the subject line. The message read, Claire, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but you deserve the truth. Evan wasn't honest with you about what really happened between him, me, and Lauren. You should ask him why she left. Tyler. Attached was a single photo, an old one. Me and Lauren at a party, taken years before we got engaged. Her hand on my shoulder, smiling. Completely harmless. But underneath it, in smaller text, was something that made my blood run cold. What he did to her was worse than what she did to him. Claire's eyes were glistening. Evan, what is this supposed to mean? I sat down slowly, feeling the air leave my lungs. It's a lie, I said. He's trying to get in your head. But why would he say that, she pressed. What could he possibly mean? Nothing, I said firmly. He's making things up, trying to cause trouble. She hesitated. You never told me the full story. About what happened with Lauren. That stung more than I expected. I thought I had told her, enough of it at least. But I realized I'd always glossed over the painful parts, the betrayal, the humiliation. Maybe she saw that as omission. Maybe Tyler saw it as opportunity. So I told her everything. Every detail. How I walked in on them. How I left everything behind. How I rebuilt. By the time I finished, my throat hurt. Claire sat there silently, then closed her laptop. I believe you, she said softly. But Evan, he's not going to stop. He's escalating. And she was right. Because the next day, I got a call from my boss. Evan, he said, voice tight. I need to ask you something. Did you really send those emails? What emails? He paused. The ones about your clients. Someone forwarded them to me, messages from your address saying you were planning to poach them for a competitor. My blood ran cold. That's not me, I said immediately. I'd never. I figured, he said. But IT traced them to your old personal email. The one under your name. That's when I knew. Tyler had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. He was coming for everything. My marriage, my job, my peace. and I couldn't let him win again. But before I could even plan my next move, something happened that shattered whatever control I thought I still had. 3 nights later, Claire got a call while I was in the shower. When I came out, she was standing in the doorway, white as a sheet. "Evan," she whispered, "he's here." "Who?" She pointed toward the living room window. I followed her gaze and froze. Tyler's truck was parked across the street, engine running, headlights aimed straight at our house. And when I stepped closer, I saw him sitting behind the wheel, holding something up to the glass. It was a photo of my daughter, smiling, unaware. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was war. I don't think I've ever known fear like that night. There was something about the way Tyler sat there in his truck, perfectly still, headlights slicing through the dark like a spotlight on every mistake I'd ever made. I could see his smirk even from across the street, faintly lit by his dashboard. He wanted me to know he was there. Wanted me to feel powerless again, like that night years ago when I walked in and found him with Lauren. The same violation, the same cold rush through my veins. I didn't call the police right away. That was the part that still haunts me. I should have, but part of me believed he'd drive off after a few minutes, that this was just another one of his games. Instead, he sat there. 15 minutes. 20. 30. Watching the house. Claire kept our daughter upstairs, and I stood by the front window, watching him back. 2 grown men playing a silent, sick staring contest through glass. Finally, I opened the door and stepped outside. "Get out of here, Tyler," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He rolled down the window, that same infuriating grin plastered on his face. "Relax, man. Just wanted to talk." "You don't talk by parking outside my house at midnight." He shrugged. "Didn't think you'd answer if I called." "Because I told you to stay away." He laughed quietly. "You always were dramatic." Something in me snapped then, not the kind that explodes, but the quieter kind that decides it's done being afraid. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You need to understand something. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight. You come near my family again, and I'll make sure you regret it in ways you can't imagine." For the first time, I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. A hint of fear. He covered it with a smirk, of course, but it was there. "Careful," he said. "Wouldn't want to make threats." "Then don't give me a reason to." He didn't answer, just rolled up the window and drove off slowly, like he'd won something just by making me come outside. After that night, everything unraveled. I filed a police report the next morning. They took it seriously, but not seriously enough. "We'll keep a record," the officer said, typing into a computer. "If he contacts you again, let us know." The subtext was clear. Until he does something tangible, there's not much they can do. Claire was shaken. For weeks, she barely slept. Every noise outside made her jump. We got cameras, changed our locks, even stayed with my brother-in-law for a few nights. But the damage was done. I could feel it in her distance, in the way she looked at me, not with blame, but with exhaustion. She was tired of living in someone else's shadow. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Living like he's still part of our lives. Every time you look out the window, every time your phone buzzes, I see it. The fear, the anger. It's like he still controls you." "I'm trying to stop him," I said. "I know, but it's destroying us." We didn't argue after that. There was nothing left to say. She didn't leave me, but she started pulling away, emotionally first, then physically. She spent more nights at her sister's, saying she wanted our daughter to feel safe. I couldn't blame her. That was rock bottom for me. Sitting alone in the house I'd worked so hard to build, lights dim, cameras blinking red, waiting for a truck that may or may not return. My job was hanging by a thread after the false email accusations. My wife was half gone. My mother was dead. And the one person who'd caused all of it was probably sitting somewhere laughing about it. For a long time, I stayed angry. But then the anger shifted into something colder, clarity. Because in all his chaos, Tyler had shown me exactly who he was. He thrived on reaction, on chaos. He wanted me desperate, reckless, loud. So I decided to do the opposite. I went quiet. First, I changed my number. Stopped posting online entirely. Deleted old accounts. Every trace of my personal life, gone. Then I spoke with a private investigator, a former cop named Harold who specialized in digital harassment cases. I told him everything, down to the last text and photo. He listened carefully, nodding, then said something that stuck with me. Guys like him always slip up. They think they're untouchable, but they leave fingerprints everywhere. You just have to stop trying to fight him emotionally and start fighting him smart. That became my new philosophy. Fight smart. While Harold began gathering information, I focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. My company, the one I'd nearly been fired from, had recently started a new division. I threw myself into it completely, working late, taking on new projects. Within 6 months, I'd not only cleared my name but gotten promoted. The timing was poetic. While Tyler spent his nights lurking around bars and old memories, I was finally climbing out of the hole he'd thrown me in. Money improved. Confidence returned. I moved us into a safer neighborhood, closer to Claire's family. She noticed the difference, the calm in my voice, the lack of bitterness. Slowly, we started to find our rhythm again. We'd go on walks, cook dinner together, talk about normal things. For a while, it felt like maybe the storm had passed. Until Harold called. "I've got something you'll want to see," he said. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, phone logs, and, most damning, a series of emails. Tyler had been using a fake name to send anonymous tips to my company, to neighbors, even to local community groups. Lies about me, about Claire, about our finances. But what sealed it was a receipt, a digital trail leading straight back to his IP address. "You can press charges for harassment, impersonation, and defamation," Harold said. "And if we push the child safety angle, the photo of your daughter, that's another layer entirely." I looked down at the stack of evidence, the culmination of months of quiet observation. It wasn't the satisfaction I'd expected. There was no thrill, no vindictive joy, just a deep, steady certainty. "Not yet," I said finally. "I'm not done." Because while I could have gone to the police right then and there, filed every report, I wanted something more. Not revenge, not in the cheap, impulsive sense. I wanted him to experience what I had, the slow realization that his power was gone, that the person he'd once toyed with had quietly built something stronger than he could ever touch. So I started planning. Not rashly, but methodically. I found out where he worked, or rather, where he barely worked. A small auto shop, underpaid and mismanaged. He'd gone from the charming life of the party to a man who scraped by, blaming everyone but himself. His landlord was threatening eviction. His truck payments were months overdue. It was almost too easy. I reached out to a lawyer, not to sue him yet, but to prepare everything. I started documenting every piece of harassment, every text, every sighting, every digital footprint Harold had gathered. Claire didn't even know the full extent. I wanted to protect her until it was done. But here's the thing about rebuilding yourself. Once you stop reacting, once you stop letting anger drive you, people underestimate you. Tyler did. And while he was busy trying to drag me back into his chaos, I was quietly setting the stage for something he'd never see coming. If you'd told me a year ago I'd be sitting across from a judge with Tyler's future in my hands, I'd have laughed. Revenge, in movies, is dramatic and loud. Car chases, smashed windows, shouting in the rain. Real-life revenge is paperwork, patience, and the quiet accumulation of facts until they harden into something unignorable. That's what I built. Not a spectacle. A trap so tidy he would blunder into it himself. After Harold turned over everything he'd found, I stopped pretending this was about pride. It was about safety. For Claire, for our daughter, and for whatever piece I had left. Harold handed me a printout that mapped Tyler's online behavior. The fake accounts, the IP addresses, the timestamps tied to nights he claimed to be with friends. We matched that to bank receipts for payoffs he'd made to kids at his old bar to spread rumors. We found a line of small charges on his card that matched overnight motel bookings near our daughter's school region on the same days anonymous photos had been taken. It was sloppy arrogance at its finest. He'd assumed no one would connect the dots. That's when I started working the angles. The law was won. Harold's evidence gave the police probable cause for harassment and stalking. The first time I handed files over to Detective Morales, she actually leaned back in her chair and said, "This is thorough. Good work." The arrestable stuff was the photo of my daughter and the pattern of impersonations. I didn't want to rush to jail just to prove a point. I wanted something more permanent, legal restrictions that made it impossible for him to casually pop back into our lives. So we built the case, piece by piece, until the district attorney agreed to file. But legalities are limited. Judges could order him away, and the court could tell him to stop contacting us. But Tyler still had people who liked him, and he still had a small town's worth of gossip on his side. So I layered strategy on strategy. I found his landlord through public records and quietly paid a visit, not to beg, but to lay out the facts. Unpaid rent, noise complaints, and the P.O. boxes forwarding suspicious mail. I didn't threaten the man. I offered him certainty. If he evicted Tyler for cause, the landlord would avoid weeks of headaches and potential liability. It wasn't romantic, but it worked. 2 weeks later, Tyler was served, eviction notice in hand, and his landlord's face when he packed up his things was the same expression Tyler used to show when he'd lost something. Priceless. At work, I found leverage through a different path. The auto shop he punched time at had a small owner, people who cared about reputation. I talked to the owner in a way I never would have before. Calm, factual, never accusatory. Harold provided screenshots of Tyler's harassment and a timeline that showed he'd used the shop's Wi-Fi during the same nights he'd messaged under aliases. A bridge I didn't expect, but there it was. Within a week, Tyler came in to find a box on his bench, his paycheck, his uniform, and a terse note stating his last day. No drama, just a livelihood removed, which hit him harder than the threat of jail. Losing his job was the first real fracture you could see. But the most satisfying part, if you can call it that, was how public I made his private cruelty without being cruel in return. I met with the PDA at my daughter's school, not to air personal grievances, but to ask for common-sense measures. Increased camera coverage at drop-off, a parent volunteer system that verified people picking up, and a simple announcement about digital safety and anonymous reporting. I handed them the evidence as something the school should be aware of and watched the room of tired, practical parents react the way sensible people do, by protecting their kids. The principal personally thanked me and said, "We'll take this seriously." I left the meeting knowing Tyler's methods, small terror, quiet intimidation, were being neutered by light and process. There was also the social layer. I didn't want to turn this into a witch hunt, but I did want the people who still adored Tyler to see him clearly. So I let the facts speak in the places that mattered. I quietly gave copies of the harassment timeline to a few mutual friends who'd been on the fence, people who knew him in the old days. I didn't smear him. I didn't beg. I just asked them to consider the evidence. Some were shocked, some defensive, but enough of them stepped back. The people who used to host his poker nights no longer did. The bar that once gave him a tab asked him to stay away. Social capital, as it turns out, can be more devastating than any courtroom gavel. Meanwhile, I built my own fortress. Work absorbed me in a way that felt purposeful instead of reactive. I took on a project that put me in front of clients I'd only dreamed of landing before, a regional rollout for a tech partner that, if it went well, would triple our new division's revenue. I worked late, loved my family by returning to it fully, and polished the parts of me Tyler had tried to tarnish. The promotion followed. The money followed. The sense of agency, finally, followed. And then the last step, the quiet stroke that felt like the end of a long argument. With Harold's help and the DA's files, we had a hearing date for a temporary restraining order and a criminal harassment investigation. I wanted the hearing to be public in the sense that the judge would hear the pattern, not the gossip. So I prepared like I was giving a presentation, printed exhibits, clean timelines, a calm summary of how his actions escalated and the tangible effects on my family. No yelling, no theatrics, just cold, undeniable proof. In court, Tyler's bravado was thinner than when he'd stood in my apartment 5 years ago. He arrived in an ill-fitting suit, the color of desperation. His lawyer blinked aggressively at the stack of documents I had in front of me. They asked for delay tactics, for more time to investigate anonymous messages. The judge, who clearly had heard of similar games, cut through the noise with a single line. Facts matter. By the time it was over, the temporary restraining order was granted, and Detective Morales had an assignment to follow up, underlining that if he breached it, there would be consequences beyond eviction. When the sheriff served him the order, I watched him absorb the reality of legal boundaries. He tried to laugh it off, to make it a joke. But the look on his face when he realized crossing those lines would put him in jail was one I'd waited years to see. Not vindictive joy, just a quiet satisfaction that the man who had reveled in my helplessness now read the same paperwork I had carefully assembled. He had limits now. His truck, his job, his social life, all fraying. That night, I sat with Claire on the porch, our daughter asleep inside, and felt a weight lift I didn't even know I'd been carrying. We weren't out of the woods. The legal system is slow, and Tyler had plenty of time to make one last desperate move. But for the first time in years, we weren't reacting. We were the ones setting the pace. Claire squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." It felt like the sun after a storm. And then the call came. Not from Detective Morales, not from Harold, but from someone I hadn't heard from in months, Lauren. Her voice on the phone was brittle, like old glass. "Evan," she said, then stopped. I braced for the usual apology, begging drama. Instead, she whispered, "He's not himself. He's saying things, dangerous things." "What do you mean?" I asked. She took a shaky breath. "He keeps saying he's going to make you feel what he felt when you left. That he'll take everything away. That he's clearing the board." I didn't want to alarm you, but be careful. I could have put the phone down then and assumed it was empty threats. Instead, I told her to keep away, to call me if anything happened, and to go to the police if she felt unsafe. She promised and hung up. That was the last day I slept without watching the driveway. 2 nights after the hearing, Harold sent me one more packet of information. It was small, a single receipt he'd pulled from an old vendor subpage tied to a company that sold locksmith services for small businesses. Many evenings, Tyler had lingered at sites related to locks and security. Alone, that would mean nothing. Together with his truck outside our house at midnight, and his talk about clearing the board, it read as something else: preparation. I told Harold to track purchases, to look for anything beyond harassment, anything that could escalate into actual physical harm. Harold nodded, and then said something I wasn't prepared for. "If he tries to escalate, he'll need a place to go. People like him don't plan that far. They improvise. It's our job to make sure he has fewer options every step of the way." A week later, something small and beautiful happened. Tyler tried to serve a notice on my brother, someone he thought might be an easy target for intimidation. Instead, he walked into my brother's workplace and was met by a man who recognized him from a decade-old bar fight and promptly called security. The man who once could walk anywhere with a swagger now had a security escort out of someone's building. Rumors and reality were finally colliding for him, and the collision was not in his favor. I won't pretend there wasn't a rush in me when that picture arrived in my phone. Tyler being led out by security like a disgraced mascot. But it wasn't the victory I expected. It was quieter, a small step. The bigger payoff I wanted was to remove his ability to cause harm in the way he had for years. Access, anonymity, and the community's blind spots. I'd taken his access away, I'd taken his anonymity away, and now I was systematically taking his allies away. Then the last piece fell into place almost by accident. One of the mutual friends I'd given the timeline to was a local contractor who did background checks for small businesses. He called me and said, "You know, you should think about the community. People like Tyler can't work where they want if everyone knows the truth." He offered, quietly, to pass along what he'd learned to a network of small employers who valued safety. Within days, a few places that would have been natural next steps for Tyler reached out to me, asking if his behavior had been documented. I shared, and the responses were immediate. "We won't hire him. Not here. Too risky." The dominoes I'd quietly lined up were falling. That was the cleanest part. Watching the supports drop away and seeing the man who'd once taken everything from me shrink into someone who had nothing left to wield but bitterness. On a Friday afternoon, less than a month after the restraining order, Harold texted a single line. "He's packed up. Out by noon." Attached was a picture of an empty truck in a driveway 3 blocks from our house. No taunting, no triumphant grin, just emptiness. I felt relief, sure, but also a strange hollow. Revenge, when taken calmly and smartly, loses the theatricality that makes it pleasurable in movies. It becomes a practical thing. The eviction notice had been served, the job gone, the restraining order in place, and his social life evaporating. He couldn't legally contact us. Employers closed doors, friends dispersed. The system had done what I had guided it to do. That evening, Claire and I sat on the couch, our daughter asleep between us, and we talked about what safe looked like. We planned vacations, updated security, and did the small rituals of people who want to reclaim ordinary life. Harold called to say the DA wanted to talk about pressing charges if Tyler breached the order. Detective Morales said she'd increase patrols for a while. It felt like the world had tilted back into place. And then, just as we allowed ourselves a deep, long breath, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw an unfamiliar number. For a second, panic surged up, the old reflex. I nearly flinched before remembering the restraining order. Then I opened the message. It wasn't from Tyler. It was a photo, crude and hastily taken from afar, a storefront with a sign half assembled. Someone had spray-painted the letters across the awning in bright red. The text beneath the photo read, "You can take his life apart, but can you keep the pieces safe?" No signature. No explanation. I showed it to Claire, who went pale. Harold answered on the first ring, his voice quiet. "This isn't over," he said. "He's still looking for ways in." I sat there, the picture in my hand, and understood that what I'd done had been effective, but it might not be final. Tyler had been cornered, yes. But cornered animals are dangerous in ways you don't always expect. So I did what I had learned to do these past months. I stopped reacting and started preparing. I thought I was ready for anything. Then Lauren called again, voice trembling, and said, "He said he has one thing left to do. He won't tell me what, but he keeps saying the reveal." My mouth went dry. If he has an idea of how to hurt us that involves what he's already lost, I don't know what he'll try. I told her to go somewhere safe. I called Harold to pull every thread he could find. I checked cameras, rerouted our routines, and called people who owed me favors. I felt the old fear, but it was tempered now with a different thing, resolve. The quiet, methodical resolve that had built the trap in the first place. Then, in the hush of night, the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang once, just once, but the sound carried through the house like a gunshot. Claire froze in the kitchen doorway, her hand gripping the counter. The night outside was silent, except for the hum of the porch light. My daughter stirred upstairs, mumbling in her sleep. I motioned for Claire to stay back. When I reached the door, I didn't open it right away. The camera feed on my phone showed nothing at first, just the empty porch, bathed in amber light. Then, after a few seconds, a figure stepped into view. Tyler. He looked awful, disheveled, pale, hair sticking out like he'd been sleeping in his truck again. His clothes hung loose on him, and his eyes, once sharp and calculating, were bloodshot and wild. He wasn't smirking anymore. "Evan," he said, voice muffled through the door. "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. My finger hovered over the phone, ready to call Morales. He stepped closer. "You think you've won, huh? You think you can take everything from me and just move on?" I stayed silent. He laughed, loud, unhinged. "You ruined my life. My job, my apartment, my friends, everything." He slammed his hand against the door. "You were supposed to be my brother." Claire flinched at the sound. I signaled her to grab our daughter and go upstairs. He hit the door again. "You turned everyone against me." Then, quieter, "I just want my life back." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "You made your choices, Tyler. Now live with them." There was a pause. Then, softly, almost childlike, he said, "You think you're better than me." I didn't reply. He let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a growl, then hurled something against the door, a small object that clattered to the porch floor. The motion light caught it as it rolled. A photo of me, Claire, and our daughter at the park. Then came the words that made my blood run cold. "Enjoy your perfect little family while it lasts." That was enough. I hit call on Morales' number. But before the line connected, I heard the distant wail of sirens coming from down the street. And then, another sound. Tires screeching, doors slamming, footsteps. Through the window, flashing lights painted the walls blue and red. 2 police cruisers pulled up fast. Officers shouted for Tyler to get down. He didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. He just dropped to his knees, eyes fixed on my door. When they took him away, I didn't feel victorious. Just empty. Watching him disappear into the back of that cruiser was like watching a ghost finally realize it wasn't welcome among the living. The fallout came quickly. The restraining order violation, combined with the stalking evidence, gave the DA everything she needed. Add in the digital harassment and the school photos, and Tyler was suddenly facing real time. Not months. Years. Morales called me a few days later, her tone professional, but not cold. "They found his truck packed with clothes, a crowbar, and a list of addresses," she said. "Yours, your brother's, your office. Even Lauren's." I went quiet. "He'd been sleeping in that truck for almost a week," she added. "We think he was planning something, but we caught him early. It was a strange kind of relief, like a fever breaking after a long illness. For years, I'd carried the weight of his presence, always wondering when he'd resurface. Now he couldn't. Lauren testified in exchange for immunity. She told the court how he'd spiraled after the funeral, how he'd grown paranoid, obsessed with me, convinced that I'd somehow stolen his happiness by moving on. She said he talked to himself, argued with people who weren't there, and once spent an entire night writing letters he never mailed, letters addressed to me. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years for criminal harassment, 2 more for violating a restraining order, Tyler didn't react. He just sat there, staring at me across the courtroom with those hollow eyes, like he was trying to remember who I was. Lauren avoided my gaze, but after the hearing, she caught me outside. "He's gone now," she said quietly. "You can breathe." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. Life after Tyler wasn't immediate peace. It was gradual, like learning how to walk again after years of limping. Claire and I started couples therapy, not because we were broken, but because we wanted to make sure fear didn't become a habit. Our daughter grew older, blissfully unaware of how close darkness had come to our doorstep. The house felt lighter. I'd catch myself standing on the porch some evenings, expecting to see headlights in the distance. But there was only quiet. Harold stopped by one day with a grin and a folder. "Official closure," he said, handing it to me. Inside were the final reports. "Case closed, restraining order permanent." He clapped my shoulder. "You did it right, Evan. No shouting, no fists. You let the truth do the work." "Did it feel worth it?" he asked after a pause. I thought about that for a long moment. It felt necessary. He smiled. "That's usually the best kind." 6 months later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, no return address, postmarked from the state correctional facility. My instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. "Evan, I finally get it. I wanted to be you because I hated myself. You were everything I pretended to be, stable, respected, loved. I thought taking what you had would make me feel whole. It didn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that I was wrong. You didn't win, and I didn't lose. I destroyed myself. Tyler." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of my desk, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what obsession costs. That night, I took Claire and our daughter out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just our favorite diner, the one with the red booths and jukeboxes that still played old songs. As we ate, I watched them laugh about something silly, the sound warm and real. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not triumphant, not bitter, just free. When we got home, I stood on the porch again, breathing in the night air. The cicadas hummed. A soft wind rustled through the trees. No headlights, no shadows, no ghosts. I thought of my mom then, her voice echoing from all those years ago. "Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you." She'd been right. Tyler had spent his life chasing the illusion of winning. I'd learned, finally, that peace isn't about beating someone else. It's about refusing to play their game. I looked up at the stars, then back at the house where my family slept, safe and sound. And with a quiet smile, I whispered, "Checkmate."